How does a kid who could barely read, who was bullied and beaten down before he even turned 15, grow up to become the face of heavy metal? The story of John Michael Osbourne, the world knows him better as Ozzy, isn't the usual rise to fame fairy tale. It's a story carved out of chaos, tragedy, and survival against odds that should have destroyed him decades ago. From the schoolyards of Birmingham to the biggest arenas in the world, Ozzy's journey has been filled with some of the most shocking, bizarre, and heartbreaking moments in rock history. Fans remember the outrageous stunts, biting the head off a bat, or his infamous run-ins with drugs and alcohol, but what most people don't realize is that behind the theatrics was a man fighting demons far darker than anything he put on stage. This is not just a history of a rock star, it's the story of a boy whose life was marked by abuse and ridicule, a man who carried the scars of his childhood into adulthood, where fame only magnified the pain. It's the story of survival, of near-death experiences that should have ended him more than once, and of tragedies that still haunt him to this day. Ozzy Osbourne's life forces one question: how did he make it through when so many others didn't? Was it luck, something written in his DNA, or simply the refusal to stay down no matter how hard life hit him? And while the legend of the Prince of Darkness has entertained millions, the untold tragic history behind the name is far more haunting. Ozzy Osbourne's story starts far from the bright lights of stadiums and screaming fans. Born in 1948 in the industrial city of Birmingham, England, he grew up in a working-class neighborhood where life was tough, money was scarce, and dreams were often crushed before they even began. For Ozzy, school wasn't just difficult, it was a daily nightmare. From an early age, he struggled with dyslexia. Back then, learning difficulties weren't understood or treated with any kind of support. Teachers wrote him off, classmates mocked him, and every day in the classroom felt like another reminder that he was different. Reading and writing became constant battles, and his grades fell behind. But what hurt even more was the cruelty of his peers. By the time he was 11, the bullying had turned brutal. Two boys in particular tormented him endlessly, humiliating him in ways that left scars far deeper than anyone could see. Ozzy would later sum it up in just one word: terrible. For a child trying to survive school, it was more than just teasing. It was abuse. The weight of it all became unbearable. At just 14, Ozzy tried to take his own life. The attempt was a desperate cry for escape, but instead of compassion, he was met with more violence. His father found him, and instead of helping, beat him for what he had done. The message was clear: there would be no sympathy, no understanding, only more pain. By 15, Ozzy had reached his breaking point. School offered him nothing but misery, so he walked away. Dropping out meant closing the door on education, but it also meant stepping into a world that had even harsher lessons waiting. He bounced between low-paying factory jobs and aimless days, looking for any way to scrape by. But without direction, trouble found him quickly. By the age of 17, he was arrested for burglary and thrown into jail for 2 months. It wasn't a long sentence, but for Ozzy, it was a turning point. Locked away in a cell, he had plenty of time to think about where his life was heading, and it wasn't anywhere good. What Ozzy couldn't have known at the time was that his darkest years were also the foundation for what was coming next. The pain, the humiliation, the anger, all of it would eventually pour into his music. But first, he had to find a way out of Birmingham's dead-end streets, and that escape would begin with a single newspaper ad. Ozzy's escape from the bleak reality of Birmingham didn't come from school or work. It came from music. He was obsessed with it, drawn to the sound of rock and roll as if it was the only thing that could drown out the noise of his troubled life. And in 1968, he made a move that would change everything. He placed a small ad in a local music shop. It read simply, "Ozzy Zig, vocalist, requires band, owns PA system." It might not have seemed like much, but that one ad was the spark that lit a revolution. Guitarist Tony Iommi, bassist Geezer, butler, and drummer Bill Ward answered the call, and together they would form a band that would rewrite music history. They didn't know it yet, but the sound they were creating, heavy, dark, and unlike anything else, would soon be called heavy metal. By February of 1970, their debut album Black Sabbath was released. The thunderous riffs, haunting lyrics, and Ozzy's eerie, unpolished voice instantly set them apart. Fans had never heard anything like it. To many, it sounded like the soundtrack to nightmares, and that was exactly the point. Within just a few years, Sabbath became a global force, touring the world and releasing album after album. From the outside, it looked like Ozzy had finally escaped his tragic beginnings. He was young, famous, and married with children. For most people, that would be the definition of success. But for Ozzy, the fame only fueled a darker side. Behind the stage lights, he was already spiraling into self-destruction. Drugs and alcohol became his constant companions. What began as a way to take the edge off quickly became a way of life. Nights blurred into days, and tours became chaotic chaotic marathons of excess. Affairs and reckless behavior tore apart his marriage, and his reputation began to crumble just as quickly as it was built. And by 1979, even his bandmates couldn't take it anymore. Black Sabbath, the group he helped create, fired him. It was a devastating blow, but in some ways it also pushed him further into the chaos. For Ozzy, rejection didn't stop the drinking or the drugs. It only made them worse. But as fate would have it, being cast out of Sabbath wasn't the end of Ozzy's story. In fact, it was the beginning of an even wilder chapter, because soon after, Ozzy would meet a guitarist who would change his life forever. Being fired from Black Sabbath in 1979 could have easily ended Ozzy's career. For many artists, that would have been the end of the road. But for Ozzy, it became the start of something bigger and stranger than anyone expected. With the help of Sharon Arden, who would later become his wife, he was pulled out of a haze of drugs and despair and pushed back into the studio. In 1980, he released his first solo album, Blizzard of Oz. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a rebirth. The record became a massive success and introduced the world to Randy Rhoads, a young guitarist whose talent seemed almost supernatural. Together, Ozzy and Randy created a sound that was fresh, fast, and unforgettable. Fans embraced it instantly, and suddenly, the so-called washed-up frontman was back at the top. But while the music was soaring, Ozzy himself was still spiraling. The early 80s brought some of the most infamous and bizarre moments of his career, moments that would forever cement his reputation as the Prince of Darkness. One of the first came in 1981 during a meeting with CBS Records. Ozzy, heavily intoxicated, pulled out 2 white doves he had brought along. Instead of a harmless publicity stunt, he shocked everyone in the room by biting the head off one, then doing it again with the second. He later admitted he only did it to silence the endless talking of a PR rep, but the stunt horrified executives. He was thrown out immediately and told he'd never work with them again. But if the dove incident was outrageous, the bat incident a year later was legendary. On January 20th, 1982, during a concert in Des Moines, a fan tossed what looked like a rubber bat onto the stage. Ozzy, thinking it was fake, picked it up and bit into it. To his horror, it wasn't rubber. It was a real dead bat. He described the moment with one unforgettable word: crunchy. That night ended not with applause, but with rabies shots at the hospital. Decades later, the story became so iconic that Ozzy even released a plush bat toy with a detachable head. But the most devastating event of this era wasn't a stunt, it was a tragedy. On March 19, 1982, while on tour for Diary of a Madman, guitarist Randy Rhoads boarded a small plane along with makeup artist Rachel Youngblood and the tour bus driver, Andrew Aycock. The pilot, reportedly under the influence of drugs, took the plane for a reckless joyride. Moments later, the aircraft crashed, killing everyone on board. Randy Rhoads was just 25 years old. For Ozzy, the loss was shattering. He later said it was the worst day of his life. Randy wasn't just his bandmate, he was the creative spark that had reignited Ozzy's career and his closest friend at the time. Ozzy kept a vow to honor Randy with flowers at his gravesite every year, a rare promise he actually kept in a life full of broken ones. The combination of shocking stunts, tabloid headlines, and heartbreaking loss defined this chapter of Ozzy's life. He was riding higher than ever musically, but inside, he was still consumed by chaos and addiction. And as the 1980s went on, that chaos would bleed into his personal life, bringing turmoil, betrayal, and one terrifying night that nearly destroyed everything. By the mid-1980s, Ozzy Osbourne was one of the biggest names in rock. He had gone from being kicked out of Black Sabbath to becoming a solo icon, packing stadiums and earning the title Prince of Darkness. But while his career seemed unstoppable, his personal life was a storm of chaos, betrayal, and heartbreak. Ozzy's first marriage to Thelma Riley had already collapsed under the weight of his addictions and infidelity. He was rarely home, constantly on the road, and when he was around, he was often too intoxicated to be a father or a husband. In his own words, he described himself during that time as a terrible husband and a worse father. He had 2 children from that marriage, Jessica and Lewis, but his relationship with them suffered greatly during those years, something he admits he still regrets. By 1982, he had remarried, this time to Sharon Arden, the daughter of music manager Don Arden, who had once managed Black Sabbath. Sharon wasn't just his wife, she became the backbone of his solo career. She managed his tours, fought with record labels, and in many ways saved his life when he was too lost in drugs and alcohol to save himself. Together, they had 3 children, Amy, Kelly, and Jack. And for the first time, Ozzy seemed to have a chance at stability, but life with Ozzy was anything but stable. His addictions led to violent outbursts, arrests, and endless scandals. The most terrifying came in 1989, when after days of drinking heavily, Ozzy flew into a blackout rage and attempted to strangle Sharon. He later admitted he had no memory of the incident, but when he came to, he was in jail, facing charges of attempted murder. Sharon, instead of leaving, chose to stay, sending him to rehab and keeping the family together. Still, the chaos never truly ended. Through the 90s and 2000s, Ozzy's struggles with substance abuse continued to make headlines. There were stints in rehab, relapse, and constant rumors about affairs and cheating. Sharon herself admitted in later years that Ozzy had been unfaithful multiple times, including a long affair that nearly ended their marriage in 2016. The betrayal cut deep, and Sharon even left him briefly, but once again, the two reconciled. What made their relationship so unusual, and in some ways so tragic, was that despite everything, they couldn't stay apart. Sharon described it as a bond that was both destructive and unbreakable. Ozzy, for his part, often said Sharon was the only reason he was still alive. And in the strangest twist of all, their family dysfunction, the addictions, the arguments, the chaos, would soon be broadcast to the world in a way no one saw coming. Because in 2002, the Osbournes opened their doors to MTV cameras, and suddenly, their private turmoil became global entertainment. In 2002, the world saw a side of Ozzy Osbourne no one expected. MTV launched The Osbournes, a reality show following Ozzy, Sharon, and their children inside their chaotic Beverly Hills home. What should have been just another reality show quickly became a cultural phenomenon. Viewers were fascinated by the constant shouting, the bizarre humor, and Ozzy himself, stumbling around the house, mumbling in his thick accent, and struggling to operate the TV remote. To fans, it was hilarious and endearing. To critics, it was shocking that one of rock's most dangerous men was now being portrayed as a confused dad yelling at his dogs. The show turned Ozzy into a household name far beyond rock fans. Sharon became a celebrity in her own right, while Kelly and Jack gained their own fame. But behind the comedy, the reality was darker. Ozzy was still battling addiction, and his family was often dealing with the fallout off-camera. By the time the show ended in 2005, the Osbournes had cemented its place in pop culture. It proved that Ozzy wasn't just a rock icon. He was a symbol of chaos, survival, and strange relatability. But as the cameras shut off, Ozzy's health and personal struggles began catching up with him. Even after decades of surviving fame, addiction, and scandal, Ozzy's body kept testing him. In 2003, a terrifying ATV accident nearly killed him. He flipped the vehicle on his London estate, suffering a broken collarbone, multiple fractured ribs pressing against vital blood vessels, and a damaged vertebra in his neck. He spent 8 days in a coma, and his life hung by a thread. Miraculously, he survived, but the accident was a stark reminder that his reckless lifestyle had real consequences. Years of substance abuse and extreme partying had taken their toll, and by 2019, things got worse. A bad fall dislodged spinal rods implanted after the ATV crash, causing nerve pain and infections that forced him to cancel numerous shows. Fans feared he was on his deathbed, but Ozzy revealed he had been diagnosed with PRKN2, a form of Parkinson's disease. While it affected his nerves and mobility, it wasn't a death sentence, just another challenge for a man who had survived more than most could imagine. Despite these health battles, Ozzy remained resilient. He had been sober since 2006, repaired relationships with his family, and faced each new obstacle with the same stubborn determination that had carried him from the streets of Birmingham to global stardom. Ozzy Osbourne's life reads like a cautionary tale wrapped in a rock and roll legend. From a bullied, dyslexic boy in Birmingham to one of the most infamous figures in music history, his journey has been marked by tragedy, chaos, and survival against impossible odds. He faced abuse, addiction, near-death accidents, devastating losses, and health battles that would have ended most people's careers, yet he kept going. His story is more than outrageous stunts and shocking headlines. It's about resilience, raw humanity, and the messy, unpredictable consequences of fame and excess. Even now, after decades in the spotlight, Ozzy remains a living reminder that survival sometimes requires more than talent or luck. It demands sheer will. So what kept him alive when so many others fell? Was it his family, his stubbornness, his genetics, or just the twists of fate? The answer may never be simple, but one thing is certain. Ozzy Osbourne's untold tragic history is as unforgettable as his music, and the man himself has become a legend, not just for his talent, but for his incredible ability to endure.